The Urbana Civilian Police Review Board will now come to order. Attendance.
Megan McGinty. Grace Mitchell.
Present.
Ivy Williams.
Mikhail Lubinsky. Scott Dossett.
Here.
Ricardo Diaz.
Here.
Okay. After attendance, it shows that we don't have a quorum to have a formal meeting to take any action. When is our next scheduled meeting?
It will be 3 months from now, so
Okay, we may have to.
January.
We may have to have a call meeting at some point to catch up.
Absolutely.
You know, so
We want to, what, in a month, maybe? We can send out emails, check availability. Gotcha.
I'll send out emails with dates
right.
that
right,
will work for people and,
right.
okay.
Because we need to catch up. Okay. All right. Any changes? Keeping in mind we can't take any action, but we can review some of the things that are on the agendas. Any changes on the agenda?
The only thing that I would say is the discussion of the CPRV review
Okay.
utilization for the July 25th.
Okay.
You still can't take any action, so there's no real point in going through that.
Okay. So we'll table that until we have a meeting. Okay. We reviewed the minutes, but you can't do any approval thing with that. Staff report. Let's say a staff report.
We're going to try to get this right this time. I've been lacking in this area. We've had 7 to date for this year police complaints so far. We have one. The last one was October 11th, and 3 of those are still under review. The other 4 have been reviewed and investigated, and letters sent back to the people. That's all I have, staff report.
Okay.
Question, President.
Yes, sir.
Letter meaning
have
the
quorum.
chief reviewed, and then the person is now holding the chief's review? Or what does it mean that they got their letters?
Okay. I should have been clear on that. So once the city receives a complaint from a citizen, then it goes, after it's notarized, goes to the police department, and the police department, the chief or their designee will assign a lieutenant or sergeant to investigate this complaint. Within that complaint, the person will be asked to come in and give further information in reference to the complaint, any witnesses, any supporting documents, or videos or anything of that nature. They will interview the officer that was said to be involved or any other witnesses in reference to that as well. Then a summary of the investigation will be submitted to it might actually be the full investigation submitted to the chief, and then they will review the investigation and send out a notification to the person, the one who filed the complaint, of the findings.
So that's the chief's decision on it. Does that include, does the finding include what the chief believes the action will take, what action will be taken, or?
Well, I'm going to defer that to our interim deputy chief, Robert Fitzgerald.
So the chief will make, after everything, he reads everything and goes over, he'll make a finding. And what he'll do, he'll send a letter out to the person with his finding, whether it's substantiated, whether it's not
Okay.
substantiated, whether, whatever his finding is, and then that person will look at it, get it, and then they'll have a chance to appeal it to the CPRB.
Okay,
Right.
so we have 4 in the complainant's hands right now, is what you're saying, after the chief has,
Yes, four that have been either deemed valid, invalid. What were the actual terms?
They could be sustained, not sustained. There's other things that could be, if they feel like they don't have a just remedy, they will then appeal it to the CPRB.
okay.
So 4 of those have been cleared. I'll use that term. And 3 of them are still under investigation.
Okay, that's a good way to describe it. 3 under investigation, 4 have been cleared. The 4 that have been cleared, the decision has been made by the chief.
Correct.
So, and they have chose not to appeal the decision that has been made.
Can I speak?
I think so.
Well, 3 of them have decided not to appeal.
Okay, 3, I'm sorry, I
But we
said
do
4.
have one, I believe, an email was sent out to you
Right.
earlier this month.
That's the one.
In
Yeah.
reference to one coming up. So we do have one that
Okay.
has decided to file an appeal
Okay.
out of those 4.
And there's no kind of update on that? That's, we don't really need to know anything, but you're saying we're going to be running down?
Still working on a date with the
date.
complainant.
Okay, okay.
Scott, you remember we had a couple of those a couple of years ago?
Yeah, we've had a couple of years ago. Well, I don't know. Are you still in your staff report?
Oh, I'm complete with my staff report,
You're-
yes, unless there's any other questions.
Well, I guess I have a comment.
Okay.
I think we have the kind of presiding attorney thing straight for an appeal, but I wouldn't mind, kind of a pass-through of what that procedure is supposed to look like. If, in fact, this does go to appeal, certainly we have new members on the board that have never gone through that
Right,
process.
right.
Right.
And with as little reps as we've done, and with the first rep being a case unsupported by counsel, and I use that term real broadly because I don't really know what it means in this case, but essentially on our own, and then the policy was reformulated for the appeal hearing to allow us to get some guidance from a legal person outside the city. And at that point in time, and the first time we had a hearing, this was when Todd Rent was here, it's like that guy thought he was running the whole hearing then, so there was a little conflict there. So it would be nice we wouldn't necessarily have to talk about it live, but for us to go over that process just a bit so that everyone understands what kind of help we get and what our responsibilities are.
Is it reasonable to set up like a training or some type of refresher?
There will be, and I think you're talking about, Mr. Dossett, a hearing officer.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's the right
And we
frame, yeah.
have hearing rules.
Right.
And those hearing rules will be gone over with the board. And any questions or concerns that you might have will be incorporated into those hearing rules.
Yeah. Do we kind of have a meeting and then go into closed session?
Yes.
For for the hearing? Is that the
Yes.
way it worked? So before we go into closed session would be a time, at least we could kind of get up to speed a
Yes.
bit more. Yeah, okay, thank you. And we can all read, because it's in the ordinance, I'm sure,
Correct.
or at least in the SOPs or whatever we call them.
Correct. Since we added a member, do we
We now have a quorum.
back up?
Welcome,
to-
Megan.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, we can. So the meeting is open, we now have a quorum, attendance has been taken. The member that's now present, are you present?
I think so.
Okay, she thinks she's here, so we now have a quorum. So we now have a quorum. Moving in, down the agenda, approval of the minutes.
Move approval of the minutes?
There's a motion for approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Staff report, you finished a second? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Megan, can you pull one of the mics closer?
Yeah, I'm not sure, I'm right.
Okay. Anything else in the staff report?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Public participation, no one is here. Old business. Any old business do we need to cover?
If you wanted to address the prior utilization for the 25th, since you have a quorum now?
Yes. You want to talk about it?
If we could, before you move any further, can we go ahead and approve the agenda?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Ayes have it. So, on the July 25th meeting, we went through 8 taser utilizations, and 7 of which actually had video. The videos were reviewed by the 3 members who were here. They were discussed by the 3 members that are here, but no action was taken on that. Has each of you had an opportunity to view your portal to watch these videos? For Grace, it's
Yeah.
so you just need to either motion to approve with no changes, or
So does
suggestions?
anybody have any suggestions or anything that needs to be changed before we move into a motion for approval?
For the cases that
Yes,
were reviewed on
reviewed
July the 25th.
Right.
Right. I have no changes or
Okay.
suggestions.
I have no changes. I was fine with them. Who else was here?
Mike Hale, and he's not here this time. So.
Okay. All right.
Does somebody just make a motion?
We need a motion for,
Well, I'll make a motion that regarding the July 25th,
Review.
2018 TASER review, that the CPRB makes no recommendation to the chief about any changes in policy or procedure.
okay, there's a motion to approve the TASER reviews that were done on July the 25th with no changes, corrections, or anything done to them to be presented. Who's seconding?
I am.
Okay, okay, there is a
Thank you,
second.
Ricardo.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Ayes have it.
okay. New business.
Okay, so now we have 2 cases that we're going to review today.
Okay.
We have interim Deputy Chief Robert Fitzgerald here standing in for Lieutenant Searles. And he's going to, the 2 cases we're going to review are U-18-3201 and U-18-4272. Interim Deputy Chief, would you like to start with 3201?
Yes, I'll start with 3201. Lieutenant Searles has told me in the past that he's explained to you about sometimes they have an issue with the plugs, so just so you're aware, on the first video was clearly out, that there was audio seems louder and distorted, that's because of the plug on the bottom of the taser. There's actually 2 videos to this one. On July 13th of 2018 at approximately 8:20 p.m., UPD officers were dispatched to a report of a disorderly and violent subject on the psychiatric floor of a local hospital. Officers arrived and met with the security officer. The security officer said that the subject was being violent and threatening staff. He continued by asking for help so that medication could be administered by hospital staff. Prior to making contact with the subject, the UPD officers learned that the subject in question was arrested the previous day and taken to county jail. While at the jail, it was determined that he would be taken to the hospital for treatment of some sort of mental illness. UPD officers learned that the subject had fought with officers both at the jail and on the way to the hospital. During both incidents, officers used a taser to gain control of the subject. While at the hospital, the subject was outwardly defiant and refused to take medication. The subject repeatedly threatened nurses, medical staff, and security personnel. UPD officers learned that the subject was in a lounge area throwing furniture around the room. 2 UPD officers, taser officers, along with a supervisor, ultimately entered the room where the subject was located. Both taser officers had their tasers out and pointed them at the subject. The subject was given clear directions as to what to do. Officers indicated that the subject had an aggressive stance, which included clenching fists. The subject indicated that he would assault medical staff and the police, and no one could stop him. The subject was given a final order to which he did not comply. Officers gained control of the subject while the subject was under power from the taser. The subject was administered medication per the doctor's instructions via injection. One UPD officer removed the probes from the subject. The subject was left in custody of the hospital staff.
All right, so now I'm going to play, Now I'm going to play the first video. It's a little longer than the second one. This is the one that had the distortion, but you can still hear.
Okay. This isn't going to end well for you. I don't give a fuck. Sit down and check for me, please. No, just relax. We're not trying to. Why are all these people coming in? If you were trying to be cool, one person would have came and talked to me. All these other fuckers. Yeah, I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk. Then get them back. Nope. I'll sit down if it's me and you. I'll stand here if it's not. Have a seat. I'll stand here if it's not just me and you. We're not walking up on you. Have a seat. Then we'll talk. I'll stand right here like I said. Stand there, that's fine, but here's what's going to happen, okay? Time for some medicine. Okay. Okay, that's it. Time for medicine. I'm not getting a syringe anymore. Like I said, I'll take a pill. Yeah, I don't know what kind of medicine they need to give you. A pill. You're going to get shot. No, I'm not. Then you can take my ass. Is that the issue? I'm not getting a fucking shot. Why? Because I don't want a shot. I don't like needles. Do you understand that these are... I don't give a fuck about that. I've been shot with a bar before while I was cuffed. It's not the same. It's not the same. It sucks. It sucks dick. The end is... It's going to be the same thing regardless of what happens. I'll get shot with a bar and a needle and you guys will look like dickheads. That's what'll happen. You guys will look like a bunch of schmucks for fucking with me.
Sharon, I came to talk to you to ask you...
I said I don't want a needle. If you got a pill for me, I'll take a pill. There's no reason it needs to be a needle, does it?
Yes, you've been threatening people.
What's the needle have to do with taking meds?
It's faster.
It's faster. Well, what's the difference? There's no difference.
trying to get you to take pills all day.
No, you haven't. Don't fucking lie, you lying motherfucker.
Okay, we're not going to talk about that anymore. We're not going to argue.
Who cares? You come at me and say, hey, take a pill? Did you? Wait.
I was in your...
I got all this shit recorded. Don't fucking bullshit me.
We're not going to argue.
You're lying, mother. You don't sit down and take a pill. No. Give me a pill. Yeah. So saying that we're offering pills, so we don't need a syringe, correct?
No.
Good call.
No.
So we don't. I'll sit down and take the pill.
We're the doctors, they're in charge.
We don't need a pill.
They say it's a needle, it's a needle.
No. You just said, and she said, and we said, you said you've been offering me pills all day, so I can take a pill, correct? I won. No, we're not past that. We're not past that. I'm getting fucking shot with a taser.
Have a seat.
You guys said. You told me. No.
You're going to get a needle whether you shot with a taser.
I'll get shot with the taser just to piss y'all off.
Doesn't matter to you.
Don't make that at all. I'm going to snitch on you too in the same process. I'll finally rip you off this goddamn chair and we'll grab you and that fucking taser will grab you up.
Are you going to sit down and take a needle or not?
I'm not taking a fucking needle.
He's going to...
Behind my head, you're going to get it again. You're going to get it again. Y'all are looking like this. Relax. You guys look like this. You resist, you're going to get it again. I'm not resisting. You guys look like this. You guys are nothing but dickheads. Hold on, man. I'm not going you guys are fucking dickheads.
Okay.
My personal opinion is he goes now.
Yeah, let's go.
You really need a needle, I'm fucking fine. Let me just go to bed, please.
Pass that.
Oh my God. Did I shit my pants? Yeah, I've been here with one of those before. I tried to attack somebody. Every time, don't it? It does, dude, it does. Hopefully you don't have to every time, just be cooperative, man. I was trying to. We didn't want to fucking use it, man. Why should you have it? I should have it over. We'll have you up, all right? What's the rule after your turn? That fucking thing. I should have ripped it out. What's that? You fucking dicks. You fucking dicks. Yep, I know. Yep. Oh, yeah, dude. That's what it is. world? You know that? There was no reason I needed to get a needle. Y'all are some pussies. Pussy-ass bitches. Oh, it's just pussy. Now, can you really wipe my ass if I shit myself? Oh, you can shit yourself. I know I do, because I don't shit myself to nobody. So where we can get it down, when you drop down, when we're going, restraints on him, and we'll take ours off, lean him back. Last time you had to do this, I was in cuffs, so this is a little bit more professional. I appreciate the fact that you understand. Amy looks like a fucking bitch. Look at you, Amy. I told you the longer you make this shit go on, the worse you look. I'm taking your goddamn company. And that's just mine now. I don't know if you know or not. I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to Amy, wasn't I? You lost your shit, Amy. Your mom's gonna be pissed at you. Oh, she won't.
I'm sorry, I thought you were giving us your
You didn't think to do that? Yeah, well, why wouldn't you? This is what happens to people in your fucking facilities. This is what they do. This is what happens to them. You're doing this shit to people. Thank you. That was pretty much
Okay, so that was the first one. The second one is a little shorter, but the voices are clearer in this one.
I don't give a fuck.
Sit down and sit for me, please.
No.
Just relax. We're not trying to hurt you.
Why is all these people coming in?
We're not
If you were
trying to
trying
hurt
to be cool, one
So-
person would have came and talked to me.
Okay.
All these motherfuckers.
Dan?
I'm gonna talk. Then get them back. Nope. I'll sit down if it's me and you. I'll stand here if it's not.
Have a seat.
I'll stand here if it's not just me and him.
We're not walking up on you, but have a seat.
No.
And we'll talk.
I'll stand right here like I fucking
Stand
said.
there, that's fine, but here's what's gonna happen. Time for some medicine.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. Time for medicine.
I'm not getting a syringe in me. Like I said, I'll take a pill.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of medicine we need to give you.
A pill.
You're gonna get shot.
No, I'm not. Then you can tase my ass.
Is that the issue?
I'm not getting a fucking shot.
Why?
Because I don't want a shot. I don't like needles.
Do you understand that these are
I don't give a fuck about that. I've been shot with a barb before. While I was cuffed.
It's not
It's
gonna
not
help.
the same.
It's not
It's
gonna
not
help.
the same. It sucks. It sucks dick.
The end of, it's gonna be the same thing regardless of what happens.
I'll get shot with a barb and a needle, and you guys will look like dickheads. That's what'll happen. You guys will look like a bunch of schmucks for fucking with me.
Dan, I came to talk to you to ask you to
I
take
said I don't want a needle. If you got a pill for me, I'll take a pill. There's no reason it needs to be a needle, does it?
Yes, you've been threatening people.
What's the needle have to do with taking meds?
It's faster.
It's faster. Well, what's the difference? There's no
We've been trying to
difference.
get you to take pills all day.
No, you haven't. Don't fucking lie, you lying motherfucker.
We're not gonna talk about that anymore. We're not gonna argue.
Who can't? Did you come at me and say, hey, take a pill? Did you?
I did.
Tell,
I
when?
I was in your.
I got all this
Dan,
shit recorded. Don't
Dan,
fucking bullshit
we're
me.
not gonna argue.
You lying
Are you gonna sit
motherfucker.
down and
We're not
take a
gonna
pill?
argue.
No, give me a pill. Yeah, so they were offering pills, so we don't need a syringe, correct?
No.
Good call.
No.
So we don't. I'll sit down and take the pill.
They're the doctors, they're in charge.
We
Okay?
don't need a pill.
They
We
say
need
it's a
pill.
needle, it's a needle.
No. You just said, and she said, and he said, you said you've been offering me pills all day, so I can take a pill,
We're
correct?
past that.
I
We're
won.
past that.
No, we're not
Yeah.
past that. We're not past. Then I'm getting fucking shot with a taser.
Have a seat.
You guys said, you
Take
told
the shots
me.
and then this is
No,
over.
no, no, no,
Thank
no,
you.
no.
You're gonna get a needle whether you're shot with a taser.
I don't
or
give
not.
a fuck. I'll get shot with a taser just to piss y'all off.
It's not nice.
I don't give a fuck. I'll get a swing on you too in the same process. I'll spider hook you off this goddamn chair and fucking attack you, and that fucking thing will grab you up.
Are you gonna right?
That concludes the two videos. Is there any questions?
I have a couple of questions. One, he'd been tased before. Is that on record, or was that by us?
That was not by us.
Okay,
It
so
was
we don't have a
another
record.
agency that tased them.
Okay. No one else. So I just have a couple of questions and then a question on the reports. On the one hand, it seems like a classic way when we thought about the taser use it on somebody who we have no other way. But my question is, if we didn't have tasers, what would have happened to him?
City officers, our use of force policies, they would have had to do something, so they would have had to go hands-on with the subject. And when you go hands-on with a subject, you risk injury to the officers and the person themselves. So if we didn't have the tasers, the three officers that were there would have had to go hands-on, try to use some control holds or something. And this subject had a history of violence and fighting with not just the police, but with the nurses and the doctors. So we would have been hands-on. There would have been a lot likelihood that someone would have gotten hurt.
Okay. So that's the questions on what would have happened. Now, on what actually happened and what's on the report, just to get it clear. As I listened to him, especially when we had a good audio, his argument didn't seem too bad. That is, he seemed like saying, I don't like needles, give me a pill, I'll take it. And so it seemed like a matter of time. The medical personnel said, this is faster. That is, they were not giving him the pills so that they would do. So that's a medical question. But for me, if I were in that situation and somebody was going to force something on me, and I'm giving an option, it seems to me that I would want that to be respected, especially because if it were medication, probably to calm me down, you know, there are reasons why some people make other choices. Now, we don't know, and I don't want to question the medical side of it, but it seems to me just on face value that we moved too fast because of time, and he did not. I know the reports said he was clenching his fist. I didn't feel threatened, especially because there was a table on the other side. So I just want to get clarity as to how long do we wait and when is the action taken.
There's a couple things just to let you know that they had this is a psychiatric ward at the local hospital that hardly ever calls us for anything unless they really need us, unless they really think there's a danger. We hardly ever get called to that floor at that hospital. So for them to call us, there's a reason why they called us. They could not handle this person by themselves. Second, they've been trying to give him pills all day and he refused to take them. Whether he was decided now or he was going to take them, I can't say for sure he was going to do that. And your point about the threats and the violence, if you listen at the very end before the officers decide to tase him, he said he was going to attack the officers. He said he was going to do a spider jump on the table, and attack the officers and wrap around them so they could not use their tasers on him. So at the end, he made a threat towards those officers on what he was going to do.
So when I listen to that, I also know that people around me say a lot of things, but until they do it, I don't act. Because if I acted on every time somebody's made a threat or said something, I probably wouldn't be here. So it's a judgment call, but
Right.
for me, I don't see enough time spent with the subject without an actual threat, a physical threat that he was in.
During that day, just to be clear, he had already fought with several officers from another department at the jail and on the way. So in that day, he had already had a history of violence. It wasn't just if they didn't know his background, but they knew he had a history of violence. They knew he attacked off the whim. They knew that he had issues, and that the doctors made a decision on what to do, what would be the quickest remedy, and we relied on them to make that. If he was refusing to take his pills and he has been throwing things around, he's been threatening staff and other ones at that hospital at that time, the officer's judgment was to use that, especially since he had already shown violence that day.
And especially for me, that makes a huge difference. This is a psych ward. You have medical personnel. They're recommending something. To me, that really bolsters the argument of the officers need to act under medical attention. You know, that makes it for me. But just from judging, if it hadn't been in a psych ward, I would say lack of patience, you know, other options to explore. If he wants the pill, and let's give him the pill and wait the 30 minutes that it takes to kick in or something. But for me, it moved very fast. You know, we saw both videos in a very small period of time. But yes, the psych ward makes a difference. And a person can be violent today, and tomorrow they could be not as violent. Yes, it happened on the same day. So yes, it inches me towards 4 minutes of watching. They did something. But I still feel like there's a gap there as to if it hadn't been the psych ward. It moved very fast. So maybe I'm just overly sensitive to the use of them, but we...
I just wanted to ask, was there a history overall with this person? Had you had previous contact previous to the incidences recorded from the day or day and a half prior? Had you had contact with him?
The information I received that he has had a history of violence in the past, yes.
Okay, so we are talking about multiple incidences.
I don't know if the officers knew that at the time. I know they knew what happened the night before and that day when he got transferred, but his previous history, I'm not 100% sure if they knew about his history,
Okay.
but they knew about his previous arrest. The night before, they knew about him that day. He had to be transported to the hospital, and he knew about the taser and the fighting that day.
Yeah, and we don't have the information as to whether or not the hospital staff had been concerned about the amping up of behavior. If he had been agitated over a period of time, the agitation could have compounded upon itself and been more harmful to him overall over a period of time. So, again, I at first, when I watched the taser video, I was kind of like, oh, that was pretty quick. But, you know, knowing that this had been going on for a large number of hours, knowing that it was a psychiatric staff that had called and said, we need to intervene. I mean, part of the reason I'm sure they called is for the patient's well-being as well. My only concern is can I just ask, how many officers must be present during a situation like this? Is it more than 2 usually when dealing with an agitated suspect?
It usually deals with our staffing, how many officers we have on the street. We don't want an officer in that situation. We would not send an officer up there by himself. So
Okay.
there have to be somebody else, at least another officer.
Okay.
In that size of the room, the fewer, the better, because you get...
Right, because I did notice there was a lot of background language. There was a nurse that was speaking, and my only concern would be that would also have perhaps compounded the person's agitation.
Right, there was a doctor, a nurse, and 3 officers, and there was a couple security officers, but they stayed off to the side.
Okay, so that might have been why he was saying,
it's
you know,
scary.
why are you all in the room and things like that. But I thought that the police officers themselves limited the amount of language they were using towards the suspect, which I think was probably a good call on their part.
Yeah.
I agree with Carlos and what he was saying in reference to the fact that it did involve being up on the psychiatric ward. Oh, it's still on? Oh, okay. On the psychiatric ward, I'm terribly afraid of needles, and when I had my daughter and they were going to give me a spinal, yep, I clown just like that, you know, so I can see that fear of being there. And, yep, they did everything, tied me down, strapped me down. I got off the table and did a whole bunch of things and said I wouldn't have no more babies after that one, and I didn't. So, but I can understand, you know, his fear of needles and the fact that it was a psychiatric ward. That, too, helps me understand it a little better, you know, so.
Yeah, I would just refer to you to the first 2 paragraphs of page 3 out of 4 in the formal report that was redacted. Notes that he was taken to jail on the 12th of July and would need to be treated for his mental illness, according to redacted, fought officers at the jail and while en route to the hospital. Both incidents, officers used the taser to gain control of, redacted. It goes on to say in the second paragraph, grew angry and threatened to harm the nurse if she came back inside the room, refused medication, and was currently in the day room area and was throwing furniture around the room, stated the medical staff, and determined that he was to be administered a certain medication via syringe. So I don't think things happened too fast at all. I think that this was dealt with very well by responding, and probably as well as possible by the medical staff that are there. The guy looked pretty big to me, pretty strong. I could see his biceps as it was going up into the yellow thing. And I don't think that I would expect Nurse Cratchit to go one-on-one with somebody like that, especially if he'd been throwing furniture around the day room. So in my mind, we have plenty of evidence here that this guy was in a super agitated state, had already threatened staff, and was threatening the physical plan of the hospital. So, that's when they call you guys. And so I don't find any problem with the application of the taser in this case at all. Very appropriate.
I guess for me, reports, and I'll ask a couple of questions on the report, but let me respond to, is there enough in the information in the taser? I saw him not lift anything. Whatever was reported, surely they would call the officers for help or whatever. But I can't rely on what the medical staff said or whatever. They're in the psych ward, they make judgments every day, but the evidence in the tape does not give me. If I was in the room, even with a big guy, there's a table, And if there's 5 of us, there's a difference as to whether somebody's saying something or not. And so in the tape, I don't see that he was that agitated and that threatening. I saw no furniture out of place. I see nothing that signals to me when I walk into the room, this is high tense, and for me to act in any other way. But let me move to 2 questions on the reports. I'm looking at, I don't know how to refer to them, but I'm comparing the first 2 reports of taser usage. I guess there was only 2 on, and the third report doesn't have a taser usage. I'm glad, before I forget, I was glad to get the full tape until he was actually injected and how he stood up and everything. It really makes a difference to know resolution happened. And so I appreciate, and I don't know if it's policy or not, but it really helped to get a full view. In this case, though, looking at the 2 forms, I know some of these things are estimations, but I am concerned about and have a question about consistency now. I'm going down to the line that says, subject admitted to the hospital for injuries. Both officers no. Subject taken to hospital for psychiatric. One says yes and one says no. Did we take him? Well, he was already there. I can see the ambiguity as to how the officers responded exactly opposite to each other on that. I don't know if you can see it. So there's 2 taser usage forms, and they're not differentiated except by the handwriting. But about 3/4 down, subject admitted to hospital for injuries, that line?
Subject taken to hospital, psychiatric, yes.
And then the other one, the other report
Subject
says,
admitted to hospital or injuries, no.
right?
And then you're asking,
So I'm saying, is there a standard to say, well, in this case, it's ambiguous because they were already there. We didn't take him. He got left at psychiatric. The next question, though, I think is also contradictory.
so let me get back to the, just so
Okay.
you're saying officer admitted to hospital for injuries, no.
No, the subject taken to hospital for psychiatric.
Right, he was already
That's
there
right.
at the hospital for
So it's easy to
psychiatric.
see why one would say yes and the other one would say no.
Because it all depends on the perception of the officer.
right.
So the officer, the one that says no knows he's already there. The one that says yes, I'll just,
That's right. So I agree that ambiguity. The next questions, though, are a little bit off for me because we should know and we should have some consistency. Subject under the influence, one says no and the other one says unknown.
Right.
If we didn't know he was in a psych ward and the two reports came like this, we would have to say, so who knows,
Well,
right? And so how is that determined, or who chooses?
Well, the one officer says unknown, so you have two officers, one that says no, one says unknown. The officer might have talked to the doctor and the nurse. If he had been there for a certain period of time, one officer reviews the doctor and nurse and they tell him no. The other one doesn't, he doesn't know. That'd be like if myself and when Preston was an officer, we went and we talked to somebody, he doesn't know the person I talked to was intoxicated or not. I go and talk to that person and I find out, yes, he was.
Okay.
He'll mark unknown because he didn't talk to that person, but I'm the one who directly talked to that person, I would mark yes.
So when we get a report, then we should assume that it just depends on what that information the officer had at
Right,
that
if
time.
the officer marked an unknown means that person might not have had any contact with that person, so he can't make a judgment whether that person was under the
Okay.
influence or not.
All
So
right.
he's gonna mark unknown every time, where the person who has contact with that person or talks to somebody who has had contact with that person will mark that box.
Okay, so for my interpretation, then, I should assume that the officer found out, and the other one didn't find out. And so then the last difference in the reports for me are in the last section, taser review, or taser information. Number of cycles applied, one officer said NA, while the other one says 1.
Right, one officer, because you gotta remember, there's two officers that had tasers.
That's right.
One did not apply his taser, so he's doing his form, and he's marking any because he did not apply his taser. Second, only one officer actually used his taser, so he's gonna say, yes, I applied my taser.
Okay, so for me, the NA does not necessarily mean 0.
Not applicable, he did not, that means not applicable. He did not fire his taser.
Well,
He did not.
so the answer is 0 or no,
Yes,
but not applicable does not necessarily mean 0.
so that would be.
It means that not applicable means the taser wasn't there or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily say no.
The officer who filled out that taser, he would have to say yes. He would have to put down the rounds he fired if he fired the taser. He did not. That's why he marked NA. He did not use his taser.
I know, but for me, the answer, it should be clear whether it was a yes or a no. It
Yes,
should be a yes or no question
So
rather
you
than
should
not
think we should-
applicable.
So you think we should change the form?
I'm looking at it now, and it's ambiguous now to me.
Okay.
The yes and the no means, and the number of cycles is a good enough question, but it should be a number rather than an NA in this case for me.
But
I think when it was formed, it means that it didn't apply. So you didn't, the not applicable meaning it didn't apply. I didn't even use my taser. I understand a yes or no for you, I understand that. But if it doesn't apply, it means it doesn't apply.
Well, but
I pulled it out, but I didn't
once the
pull the trigger.
laser, the taser has been activated, it's been applied, that's why
Well,
we have
but
footage.
the cycles have
But
not.
the cycles are still 0, but it did apply because it was
But
activated.
they didn't pull the trigger. So until they pull the trigger, there can't be any cycles.
That's right.
So it doesn't apply.
There are no cycles, but not applicable can be inferred as I didn't need to squeeze it for the last stage, or it could mean also that I turned it on, but I didn't need to turn it on, because we've had a case like that, right? It was activated by mistake just as they walked out or something. So for me, the instruction ought to be take it as a number so that we're not in the middle. Because had there not been a second officer, we don't know. So I don't know if it calls for changing it or just as an instruction to say, just write the number. If it's 0, it's 0.
Well, we want our officers, if they don't use their taser, to mark that they didn't pull the trigger. We want them to be able to mark that on that form that they did not pull that trigger. That's why that's there. I mean,
we
we can possibly change the wording a little bit to help out, to be clearer. But if they do not actually fire it, we want them to put that down on paper.
That's my comments.
Okay. Any other comments? Go ahead, Megan.
I would tend to agree that not applicable would be appropriate. I can see parallels in what I do in my setting, in my work setting, where if someone does not have contact with an individual, we require them to also write not applicable. If you don't have contact with an individual during an incident, we write not applicable, because that way we know they were not in direct contact in the way we are discussing about a person. It's about as clear as I can be, and that's about as clear as mud. But I would prefer not applicable because 0 to 5 infers that a taser was initiated to me, and not applicable means that the taser was not discharged. Am I getting what you're...
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So I would tend to agree with not applicable. That's just...
Yeah, and I mean, what we have are the first pages of a 2-page taser use form here. So I got a little bit confused about that because that second page wasn't there. And on that second page is where the, you know, there's a checkbox basically about probe contact and stuff like that. So I got a little there
I
again.
don't remember the second page.
Yeah, well, it looks like, I mean, I've got PDFs up. Yeah, I've actually got a form consistency issue to bring up that I came out of this review, but I'm going to wait until after we actually do all of the look-see. I mean, I kind of know where I kind of know where my friend Mr. Diaz is coming from, because NA is not a number. But at the same time, in the beginning of the form, you know, since there's no probe contact, the implication is that the taser was just displayed. It wasn't discharged. So. I would just note, since there's a lull in the conversation, and I'm never one to let that go, that on the you know this you know, this kind of works both ways, because on the second supplemental report, this would have been, I think, from the non-discharging officer. Again, there is more detail about the subject threatening to batter staff and security, and some of the sort of the details about this. So the way I do these is I read the PDF first and then view the video. And so I think that we really need to do both of those, because there's information. And partly I like to read well, I don't know if I like to read the reports, but I read the reports just, you know, kind of out of respect for the people who filled them out and the whole custody chain that we've developed here. But the language that they use is very interesting. And 2 officers or 3 officers responding to an event never use the same terminology. I mean, they may have came into the scene 5 minutes or even 10 minutes later, or confronted one suspect and not another in the case of dealing with an apartment room full of people. You know, there's a lot of good info in here. So,
I agree. Actually, I have one more question, and that's, does the fact that cameras will be worn now minimize the use of reports by the officers? It seems like now we have 4 angles of looking at something, and it's hard enough writing reports and the time and whatever else. But
No, we're still going to do reports. Anytime we get a call where a criminal act or something like that happens, we will do a report. It'll be the same as always. The only thing is, you'll have the video now to back up whatever's on that report.
So it's one more layer. It's not necessarily a replacing of anything.
No, it's not replacing the reports.
Okay. Anything else? on that?
No,
Okay,
I'm good.
okay. All right, positive use.
Yeah, that's the second time somebody's.
Okay, then we have another one.
Do you want to do one at a time, or you want to do both at the end? As far as your,
What is your pleasure?
But what, pardon me?
Do them one at a time, or do them both at the end?
One at a time, at least. For me, this one has closure already, so
Okay.
I would not want to.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm ready to go
Forget.
4272. If that's
Right.
what everybody else wants to
let's
do.
move to the next one. Ready?
Okay. I'll just note that Lieutenant Searles wanted me to remind you again, the plug in the bottom of the taser in the video was clearly out, and that is why the audio seems louder and distorted. This is a continuous issue we are working to resolve as the plugs get knocked out and lost easily. And going to your question about body cams, that's going to help us when we do have the body cams with this. On September 9, 2018, at approximately 11:17 p.m., UPD officers were dispatched to a report of a stabbing in southwest Urbana. Officers arrived and met with the reporting person. The RP indicated that someone had been stabbed inside of a nearby apartment. Several officers went to the apartment and began knocking. Several officers removed their handguns, while another officer removed his taser. Ultimately, the door opened and several adults and a child exited the apartment. Once everyone was outside, the officer returned his taser to his holster.
okay. So now I'm going to play this video. It's pointed at the ground most of the time, but it has some good audio.
Get her to give us consent to get inside. 10-4, you give us general welfare. You give us general welfare. Did you have police department come to the door with your hands up? Come to the door with your hands up! Show me your hands. Walk out, outside, show me your hands. Walk to them. Who else is inside? No, it's just that. Stay right there. What is going on? Right there. Step outside your hands here. Go up now. Step outside your hands up. What is going on?
Watch with me. Watch with me.
What is going on here? We just want to make sure we got somebody got stabbed in the leg. We want to make sure that we can get hurt, okay? So I want you to one at a time, walk out your hands here. And then we can hear you, and then we can get
Baby still upside down.
You're going to walk out and come into the door, okay?
Hey, boy, you never know. Come on now.
Walk over this way.
Please shut my door. Ain't nobody inside. Please shut my
Let me explain. Talk to me. Because they're checking welfare to make sure nobody else is hurt inside. We just gotta make sure.
that completes the video for that case. Wasn't really a lot there, but
And the report seems kind of, in a way, kind of ambiguous as well, like, because nobody was really, it didn't sound like the officers ever got a clear idea of what was going on.
No, they didn't. They didn't know if there was someone injured inside that apartment. They could never find the victim. They didn't know if there was an offender inside that apartment. They did find blood, and they did find people with injuries that showed that they were in a physical altercation. So, and then they got conflicting. One person said there was a bad stabbing, another person said it was nothing. So they got conflicting information from people, and the best thing they could do was secure that apartment, make sure there was no one inside that was either an offender or someone that was injured and needed medical assistance.
Did they find out if anyone actually was at the hospital? Did the hospital have to make it after they asked them to let them know if a stabbing victim came
Right,
in?
no one ever came in. No stabbing
Okay.
victim ever came in. That would be connected to this report at the
Right.
end. Later on,
Okay.
if someone came in 2-3 hours later,
Okay,
but no one ever came in the hospital.
okay.
No resolution, really. So, no real resolution at all.
Right, that's why if you look, the reports listed something else, because we could never, the officers at the end could not figure out because they were uncooperative, different information. They could never figure out what actually happened at that incident.
I'm very confused right now.
They were at the time, too.
Who'd they have a pistol pointed at? Was a pistol pointed at somebody?
That there's several adults that came out, and as they
Gotcha.
had them, they took them out by gunpoint.
Okay, okay.
Well, as little information as we got from the taser, I think that was an appropriate use of the taser. They had it as a backup, it pointed down, it wasn't threatening anybody, and they had a gun as a backup because you didn't know. But for me, just getting the audio is good enough, as bad as it is, because if he didn't have to point it at somebody, that's a good sign. So, you know, body counts will make a difference, but in this case, for me, that was one of the discussions we had about using the taser as a primary threat or containing whatever. But pointing down, we've had several, and they don't seem to be useful, but it tells us a lot that they didn't have to actually raise it and point it, so I like it.
I think that what I notice the most, even when it is pointed down, is really the tone of the officer's voice, the inflection of the officer's voice, just being able to hear that and, you know, knowing that they seem to be following what very little I know about police procedural. You know, they're covering all their bases. They're being very respectful. Their voices are never raised. They're keeping it as calm and as thorough as they can. And I haven't seen any instances where I would
In
have
spite of
questioned
the
that.
adversity, if somebody's really in danger and they kept their cool, so I like it. I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
Just a quick note, again, we don't have the second page of the taser usage form, although it's available on the PDF. Laser display only was tabbed, and he did count 0 cycles. So Ricardo,
I'm happy with that
he's happy with that one. So
Actually, it's empty. It says empty rather than 0, but it's a good thing.
well, no, on this one it says 0. 0 with a. Isn't that what O with a line through it means?
I'm just curious, what is a drying locker, and you placed it in an EL5? What are those?
You're asking what a drive's done or a drive?
No, the drying locker and the EL5,
Oh, that's
the evidence room.
They had collected wet, in case something, like you said, if we came back and someone had died or someone was seriously injured, the officer's responsibility is to collect as much evidence at that scene as her or him possibly can. So what they did is they collected they found blood inside the apartment. So they collected some evidence, clothing, blood droplets, and we have a drying room, which we keep that because you don't want to just leave blood things hanging out. So we have an evidence drying room that we keep at the Urbana Police Department where we store this under lock and key.
Oh, it's not dried or something.
It dries eventually, but
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
That's why we have the drying room, so he can dry out there, and then we
Okay.
can send it on. If something happens, we can send it on to the crime lab or anywhere
Right,
else. But we
okay.
need a place to keep that until it dries.
Okay.
My last question is only, I think, for Preston. I don't know
Yes, sir.
whose hands it goes through. So the first report, the 1 of 5, it just, I don't know why it's missing number 2 and number 4. It says 1 of 5, and then we get 3 of 5, and then 5 of 5. Is it because they were empty, or is that just, I mean, we have enough
When
info
I
to be
made the
confused.
copies,
Who made copies? and
I
why?
made the copies, and when I made the copies, that's what you got. I can't, I should have looked through each one of them, but I
I think
suggested that I assumed that the printer was going to print what I put in there, so.
I think maybe because it just had names on that, and we, rather than just redact all the names, all it is it doesn't have printing. I'm
doesn't
assuming
have
that's
info.
what they're talking about in the report
Honestly,
itself.
I don't even know the answer
So
to
a note
that.
should be made for us so that we don't feel like some stuff is being held back.
But
So-
it is online, correct? It's on the one online?
Well, yeah, I mean, my suggestion here is that Preston not do the photocopying. Because I think he probably meant to go from two-sided to two-sided, and he went from two-sided to one-sided
one-sided.
instead.
That's probably what happened.
Because there's about every other page is missing, and that's one of the reasons I brought up the fact that we're missing the one side of the
Of
taser
the
use
form,
form
yeah.
on both of these cases, and that I think that's kind of what helped it was a good conversation, but it helped a little bit of the confusing feel about the 0 cycles and stuff like that. Because if you're reading what packet you have in front here, I mean, I'm looking at the PDF online right now as we're talking. So,
Yeah, I need to make sure that it's there, because all the other packets I brought last month's pack or last meeting's packet, and it has both sides.
Yeah.
What you said about the two-sided to one-sided is probably exactly what happened.
I can assure you, when Preston was a police officer, he was a lot more thorough. So.
I didn't make very many copies. I
Your
just
job
printed,
that
right?
is just
Okay. Anything else on the taser presentation? Thank you.
Are you gonna recommend any action? Have you guys?
So I forget what our procedure is, but I recommend, I see no further action needed in either one of the taser usages.
Okay.
And
I
if
think
there is
that
a
could be
motion to
liaison
be
of-
made, then
Right.
I'll
Okay.
make it so.
Okay, you made your motion?
Yes.
Second, the
Accept.
motion is to accept the taser reviews, making no changes, and accepting them that they are
Proper usage.
proper usage of tasers. Is there a second? Okay, there's a
Seem like
second.
Scott got a.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about paperwork a little bit, and I want to suggest that we make changes to it. I don't have any problem with the way that I think we're resolving these two cases, but I don't want that to be the end of our recommendation, because I would like to make a formal recommendation. That's not necessarily about these cases,
So would you like to
but
make
are
a
about the
separate
review
motion?
form.
Would you like to make a separate motion?
Well, you want to vote on the first one
Yep, that's what I was
first?
gonna do.
And
Mhm.
then, yeah, I just wanted to
Okay.
make sure that, because, yeah,
Okay.
sure. So
Okay.
I'm ready to vote yes on that.
Okay, okay. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Now,
Okay, so the motion I'd like to make is that, one or two of us from this group work on the Urbana Police Department taser usage form to try to simplify and/or clarify the responses that the officers have to fill out. I will note to you actually, one of the problems that it says taser CEW information continued. I think we probably want to label that page 2 of 2. So we've got a page 1 of 2 and a page 2 of 2 just for our information. But the second question on that second page is, did display or laser deter/gain compliance from subject, yes or no? So you've got two. You've got dichotomous questions there I think we either need to, I mean, I'd never noticed this before, and I tried to look at old ones to see if there had been a change, and all that I could see is that everything from 2532 up to now has this problem.
Okay.
And there are a couple of other places on the form where I think we might be able to do a little wordsmithing to make this thing easier to use for officers.
Okay, one of the things I'm hearing is that we have a motion on you're making a motion, but within that motion, you're explaining the details of what needs to be taken care of in reference to the form.
Just one of them as an example.
Okay, so in doing that, would you not want to have someone from the police department working with us?
Oh, yeah, I said one or two of us work with the chief or whoever, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
okay.
what I meant to say.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
motion is that to work on improvements to the form that's used.
Yes,
Okay, for
specifically the taser usage form.
Got you.
Right.
Okay, okay. And included in that, you gave some examples
Right.
of things that need to be corrected or revised or whatever.
Well, I think I've got some ideas. I wouldn't mind sharing them with
Okay.
people, yeah.
Okay, so in putting this together, you need someone that's going to be working with you, okay, who we will be working with to do this, setting up a time to do it.
Well, I would hope that the chief would be amenable to trying to make the form easier to use,
Okay.
you know.
Okay, that was clarity on your motion.
yeah.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, there is a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And Preston, you will check and, let the...
So,
Oh, here's the interim.
interim
chief.
deputy chief, how will be the best way for that to occur?
I think you guys have been working with Lieutenant Searles on most of this, so I will talk to Lieutenant Searles about maybe getting a meeting between going through Grace and having a meeting, setting up some meeting where he can bring the form and they can go over it and make changes where it needs to be necessary.
Okay. That's a sound, okay? Okay.
Just a comment before we move on from that. 2 years ago, was it, when we did the forms, and I forget it, but it's been a couple of years since we first. We had a lot of fears back then. There was a lot of fears presented to City Council as to usage of tasers. I think we've had a really good process, and while sometimes it's just tedious, it is a review, of the situation. We have enough information. I've never felt like we didn't. So I think that there was a good job done, and it is being done. So for whoever watches this, if there's any comment, please bring it up. But at least from my perspective, having sat in the room with you, the fears are that, and here we are refining it. But we got enough info, and the situations are there, and it feels clean. It feels
Right.
transparent. So I'm very happy, because whoever was unhappy with both getting them and then using them ought to join and see that things can work.
Yeah. So they have worked. Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Before me, but outstanding.
I have a question,
Yes.
Reporting Secretary, so that I'm clear, because there was a lot of conversation. The motion that was just made is for the CPRB to work with city staff to review the Urbana Police Department taser usage form and possibly update or make changes as seen needed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Mitchell, I have one more thing before we close, because we're coming to that end.
Okay.
I haven't heard, and maybe this is a staff, we did the ride-alongs. I have used them many times in talking to the community as to when I went, I saw this, And so, not that it's a great thing to have to do and coordinate, but I found them very useful, and I don't know where our status is there on this year anyway.
I did a reminder not too long at the last meeting, the meeting before the last meeting, when we had a quorum in reference to, doing ride-along. I did one last month.
Okay.
Interesting, interesting. I think that we need to all be involved at different times. Sometimes they get away from you,
Yeah.
but they need to be done. you know, so I was feeling guilty because I hadn't been out for a while, you know, but I got one done. I spend a few hours out there usually when I do this.
Yeah.
The officers that I ride with have all been very nice, you know. I always get caught out there with somebody that knows Miss Grace. Never fails, never fails. So I might have to give a dirty look or something so you know better, you know, so, but I think we all need to continue to do what we need to do and be involved in that. One of the things that I have continued to see us not as actively engaged in is when we first started was doing community stuff. You know, we used to meet with the Ministerial Alliance, go to events that they would have in the community at different places. But it's getting to be wintertime now, and I don't hear of too many things that are actually going on. I think we need to start looking at engagements and things that we can be involved in. Not so much with wintertime, you know, but spring is going to come if all goes well. So I would like to see us move forward and go from
So maybe for next meeting, we can draft a list of places or people that we'd like to put ourselves out there with, because
I think that would be
I think
good.
there's a good flow when we do have that
Right.
information, both from inside
Mhm.
and then
And
from the
us.
community,
I
just
agree.
to, you know, temperature check.
I agree. So,
As far as your ride-alongs, it is coming up about that time for you to get your yearly in. So I just need availability when you're interested in doing it, and I can get with Sergeant Lushin and find out when they have the space within your allotted times.
I just had mine.
I know, I remember. So when you get to the announcements, I do have one.
Okay, all right.
Well, can I continue on that theme for a bit?
Yes.
It's been a couple of years since I've made this suggestion, and the possibility that we may have to do an appeal hearing has got me wanting to offer it up again. And I don't know how you mock trial, but I don't think that would hurt us to actually go through that procedure. You know, go up to the secure room and, you know, have somebody who's submitting evidence, and it wouldn't have to be as lengthy as a real trial would be. But the mock trial concept has always really seemed to me almost to be a necessity, and partly that's because of the good thing that we don't go to appeal very often, but we're all rusty, and, you know, we were talking about that before. The other things in the context of training that I've always appreciated, in addition to the ride-alongs, were, you know, we spent some time at ILEAS. I'm seeing him in my mind, but, you know, the guy over the Police Training Institute at U of I has got all kinds of sort of ancillary training that we could do.
Slosher.
Thank you, Michael Slosher.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to fill up people's schedules unneeded, but I think one of the things that this board position does require is a little bit of enhanced knowledge about what kind of methods and tactics the police use. It makes everything else kind of make more sense. In the event you kind of feel like you have to kind of make an intuitive judgment about another judgment that was made. And so, you know, if we could do one of those this next year, I don't think that would be bad. You know, the ILEAS trip, we spent time in, like, I'll just call it the shooting simulator.
That's when I killed that man accidentally.
Yeah, I probably killed somebody in the house behind the
missed
guy I shot at.
I killed him.
Where's that at now?
Is that the training?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so you know, just kind of brainstorming about those kind of things. I think certainly, you know, for me, part of doing this job in the community is when you start talking to people about what it is that you do, them feeling that, in fact, we as their kind of the citizen representatives, you might say, you know, have kind of got our ear to the ground about some of the things that are going on, and those practical things like the shooting exercises and stuff like that, that I think that's valuable. The ride-alongs, you know, some of the stop and search kind of stuff that we did during the Thursday night class, you know, that's 11 Thursdays in a row where we actually went out to the airport in the dark, and there were people that were being trained in terms of stop and approach and that kind of thing.
Was that at the Citizen Police Academy?
Yeah, the
with
Citizen
Slosher?
Police Academy.
That
Yeah.
should be coming up again.
Yeah.
I don't have a date, but I
Yeah.
can definitely send that information out. When
Yeah, I
do
mean,
it.
I think any of us that could afford that kind of time, and I'm not sure, I've done it once, that would be something I'd recommend. So, you know, maybe if nothing else, when the police academy is occurring this year, could just be circulated to members of the board, you know, and they would know. That's a real full spectrum thing. I mean, you hear from prosecutors, you hear from defense attorneys, and the state's attorney was there, and, you know, you just kind of roll through the whole process. And again, I think that's good as we try to represent the community for us to get that kind of knowledge base, so.
Actually, Scott, let me help you on that a little bit. Why not put in the credits once you have the dates for this room, for this thing? I mean, for Jason to just roll when it is, so people can join, because it is a citizen, the invitation's out to the whole town, right?
Jason just tagged our hearing with the Citizen Police Academy
Yeah.
information.
He just woke up, so he can put it on. But actually, let me ask him to do one more thing. When we have our training as to what to do with an appeal, I think we may need a training, but I think the citizens would be better served if they knew how a
process.
case will be taken up and under what circumstance. Because as a person who's made appeals and having not been there very often, I don't know what I'm signing up for if I decide to fight something further. And I always teach my kids, always appeal the decision, because you don't know what the next layer is, but it's going to be more thorough than the first decision. And I'm not saying it about police. I do it with the university all the time. They deny you, appeal, because you don't know what's going to happen, and you're going to get a consideration that's deeper than so whatever. So in this case, I think whenever we have the training, if we can put it in writing or do something, there you go. Jason, again, could film some of it to say, this is how it's carried out. If it's a mock one, then there's no hurt in teaching people outside that an appeal is considered seriously under this circumstance or not. So
Is not the appeal process included in writing somewhere?
It is. It's
It is
in
in writing,
your SOPs
because
of how
I know
it operates.
when we did an appeal, the person that was appealing, okay, they're notified and told what to expect, you know, what will be happening in the appeal process. So to me, that's really important, that they do have an idea what's going on and don't come in blindside.
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's a-
probably in the ordinance, and we have.
It is.
We have page 1, page 3 of it.
Scott gonna rub that in, right? I know. It didn't print right. All right.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, you know, I mean, it depends upon what kind of training load you guys want to take on. You know?
Yeah, I'll have to sit down with Todd and legal to figure out how and if that would actually happen in that manner. Or
Yeah, a
would it be just
refresher, it
normal
would just-
training.
A
like
refresher in the appeal process for us. For all
decision's not
parties
up to me.
involved, actually.
yeah.
So, okay, anything else?
Well, since I'm being mouthy here, I don't necessarily want to
Unnecessary.
add it to the motion that was made, because we'd have to make a new motion.
Yes, you do.
But I would hope that in the process of revising the form that we talked about before, the TASER usage form, that, you know, the guys on the street using these would, you know, be able to have some input. You know, I mean, if you have, you know, take a couple of these guys that have filled these things out recently, as you're interacting with Searles or whoever is going to do this, and, you know, get a feeling from the street feel for how well this works for the guys on the job, you know.
I can
Way
let you,
above my pay grade.
what we changed over the last few years is now we have, whether it's uniforms, whether it's whatever we do, we have committees now where we have officers. We actually have input from the officers rather than just making a decision. So what we do now is we actually get input from the police officers on what they think might work and rather than just making a blind decision and then having to change it 2 months later.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, anything else? Scotty, got something else? Okay. Okay? Anything over here, Mandy? Okay, announcements.
All right, I just have one announcement, which you reminded me when you spoke about the Ministerial Alliance. So the Ministerial Alliance of Champaign-Urbana is having a meeting on October 27th, 2018 at Bethel AME Church at 401 East Park Street, Champaign, Illinois, 61820. It is a breakfast meeting at 10 a.m., which is on a Saturday, October 27th. Is to assist in the planning to encourage the community to get out there and try to help some of this, curb some of this gun violence that we have out here. So that would definitely be a good meeting to kick it off, and it's right around the corner. If you guys are interested in attending, it's on October 27th,
10 a.m.
10 a.m. It's on a Saturday
at Bethel.
at Bethel AME at 401 East Park Street, Champaign, Illinois. The contact number would be 217-390-5622. It doesn't say who it goes to,
I
but
think it's Roundtree, Tanya
Okay.
I think it's the Roundtree that is president of that now.
yeah.
It was Evelyn for a while, Underwood. I think it's Roundtree.
Then it was Carr.
Yeah,
Carr was doing it for a while. I don't know. I
right,
never-
right. I think it's the Roundtree girl. Her marriage name is Carr.
Reverend Nash is the president now.
Okay, okay. Nash.
But that's all for announcements from me.
Okay. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
There's a motion, second.
It's all moved.
Good night.